Econ Solutions, how to write a 25 mark essay, and this is just a short guide to the Unit 2 essay, just to try and get you those 25 marks. So the first thing to note is that you'll be asked essentially two questions based around two things, and that will be economic growth and the balance of payments. So it will lead you on to talk about the general performance of the economy or the recovery that they're experiencing in relation to growth and the balance of payments, and the general economic health of the UK economy, which is in Unit 2. The other thing they may talk about is conflicting government objectives. The reason they'll talk about these is because there's a constant debate between these objectives and governments talking about whether we should pursue growth at all costs or whether that is a detriment to the environment, and things like whether we should pursue growth if we know it's going to cause very high inflation and affects people negatively in that way. So this leads itself onto these evaluation points, again, which you need to include within the 25 mark essay. The other thing you may get asked is things to do with the variables that lead to growth as well, or lead you to talk about growth. So a question in the past has talked about the budget deficit. So if we decrease the budget deficit, how will this affect the unemployment rate? So if you're decreasing the budget deficit, that means you're going to either increase taxes or reduce government spending, and therefore that can have a negative effect on the unemployment rate. So there's a conflicting objective there, and you'll have to talk about that and how it affects growth. The other thing you might need to talk about, again, with things like taxation and government spending, it'll be fiscal policy. You will have to talk about monetary policy as well, to do with things like interest rates on inflation, which again is a question that's been asked in the past. So with these two questions, as I said, there's growth and the balance of payments, and they're going to be talking about things like aggregate demand components, so C plus I plus G plus X minus M, and you're going to have to use your knowledge of the link between these components to say how that affects growth or how that has an effect on each other. So if government spending decreases, how will that affect consumption, and how will that then go on to affect the economic growth? So you'll have to use different diagrams showing a shift out in aggregate demand or a shift in, depending on whether these components increase or decrease. And remember, there's an inverse relationship between imports and the aggregate demand. So if aggregate demand increases, if imports increase, aggregate demand will decrease. So there's an inverse relationship there, so be careful of that. The other thing is that not only will they talk about AD components and the link between them and the effect on growth, they'll also talk about supply side measures. Okay, and you can talk about both when using your evaluation depending on the question. So supply side policies are just about production within the economy, how much we're supplying, and that's affected by things like education and training, productivity, and investment within infrastructure within the economy. So things that are trying to increase the general output for a given input and improve by increasing things like education. So again, you're going to have to use your diagrams, so show AS shifting upwards if there's a reduction in one of these three policies, or if there's an increase, then you can show AS shifting downwards or outwards, and then you can use the diagram to analyse how that would affect the price level, so inflation, and the real national output as well. So again, talk about things like employment and also how it would affect consumption, and always linking between these different variables and the effect on growth. As I said, the other thing you will get asked on is a component of aggregate demand, but it's the balance of payments, and it's to do with the current account. And this includes as well net investment incomes and net transfers, so things like dividends from companies abroad, the profits that come to us, and also things like foreign aid to do with net transfers as well. The key terms you're going to need when doing a balance of payments question is to think about trade deficit, trade surplus, so whether imports are greater than exports or exports are greater than imports. And then you're going to have to think about as well a deeper understanding of the general international economy, because you're going to have to think about exchange rates. So how will a strong pound affect our exports? Because it should reduce our exports because they're more expensive to foreign countries, and you're going to have to think about that in a more detailed way. So when you're asked about the balance of payments, it's usually to do with an increase or decrease of imports and exports, and therefore you can use the diagrams that are shown in the growth section, because again it is affecting aggregate demand, shifting it out or in, ceteris paribus. The other thing to note is that you will have to take it into more detail. Okay, so you can pause this and read what I've put down there, but it's just to explain that you're going to have to consider international markets, because exports and imports, as you can see, is to do with trade with other countries. So you're going to have to think about what state the pound's in, the euro's in, and talk about the different economies and where their position again is in terms of growth and the economic health of their economies, as well as our own. The final thing is make sure you structure your essay. So once you've got all the content, that's good, but then you're going to need to structure it. And make sure you put your point, application, analysis and evaluation in this order, and you can see, if you pause this video, how I've done that step by step using key terms. For instance, in application you're going to need to reference the extract. Analysis, you're going to have to use things like as a result or consequently, using diagrams, and explain in a bit more detail what the extract is saying and what the question's asking. And then finally talk about the wider context. So if it depends upon something, again, the magnitude, the size of things happening, the size of shifts, whether it's to do with aggregate demand or supply, and that really helps you to evaluate if you consider the wider context of the economy. And if you revise the content above and are able to put it into this structure, you should be well on the way to getting those 25 marks.